everyone to the Game Dev Discussion Podcast. This week we have Nate Stevens, the principal artist at Sony Santa Monica. Dude, thank you for coming back on.
Hey, thanks for inviting me.
I suppose everyone listening, just be aware, we are re-recording this. Yesterday we did a fantastic podcast and the audio got corrupted. So Nate has been very kind of very generous with his time, and you've come back on and we will do this again.
No
I'm
problem.
so sorry, man.
It happens.
Unfortunately, technology. But there's one thing we did speak about, which was quite curious, was remote work. We've had COVID hitters. Everyone's been forced to work from home. And from the sounds of it, you guys have really rolled with it pretty well. And for the wider industry, this is a good thing, right? Because we're getting to a point where, the barrier of, oh no, you need to be in house. Suddenly, a lot of people are raising their eyebrows, going, well, not necessarily. This is working really, really well. So, do you think this is going to be here to stay, remote work?
Yeah, I think it is going to be here to stay, and I think it's really a positive thing for a couple of reasons. I mean, one, we've always looked at talent across the globe, and sometimes it's not practical to have someone move to Los Angeles, even though they may want to. You know, you have to get a visa, and you have to move a family, and things like that make it really hard. This has now opened the doors to where we've seen, because we were forced to do it and figure out the technical sides of it, and it turned out to be not quite as difficult as we thought. And people at the same time are being very productive. In cases of some artists I feel are even more productive because they don't have the distractions of, other coworkers bugging them, or, the snacks in the kitchen, stuff like that. Some people are actually thriving under these circumstances. And then also, let's be real. Los Angeles can be an expensive place to live. Housing, there's traffic. Maybe you don't need to live in Los Angeles now to work at one of the big studios. You can live somewhere else and remote in. We've proven that it can work. I'm pretty excited actually, because now there's talent that before would be it's kind of inaccessible or it'd be a big deal. Is now we ship you a computer and a development kit and you can work with us.
Yeah, because at first I thought that this idea, the remote, before COVID hit, working in outsourcing, I was like, okay, maybe this is the remote work alternative to studio life. Is okay, outsourcers are always remote. For the most part. There's a couple who have offices, but now it's oh no, I could be. I mean, for example, I'm a counterplay, and they were remote before COVID hit. And it worked. And it's really odd for me. I mean, I don't know how you felt it. You've been in the industry way longer than me. But I was kind of waiting for the moment where it all went tits up. But it's working. It's working really well. And I'm like, this is weird. I expect something to go wrong here.
I mean, it works really good for art. The art disciplines, because you have a computer and, like I said, your development kit, your PC, Unreal, you name it. You can work, especially when your tasks are week-long tasks, month-long tasks. If you're making an environment, for example, we have guys on those for years. So it works good for art. It's yet to be seen how well it works for other departments. The guys that work with the actors and stuff, and maybe the design groups. I think they have different challenges. But even if you can work at 90% capacity, but we get more talent that way. It's a total win. If we would have had the talent not come at all because of the location difference, the time difference, now we can get them in even a limited capacity. I think it's gonna be great for our industry and sort of globalize the game development in some way.
Yeah, there's a lot of people, and I didn't really have my eyes open to this until I got to Decagon, where there's some fantastic, Russian artists or Brazilian artists, and I'm like, you get yourself into an echo chamber really when you only work with or talk to the UK games industry, the Scandinavian games industry, the US games industry, and it's like, oh wait, there's these other countries which you sometimes don't consider as where there's a lot of talent, and it's there's some of the strongest artists I know from these regions, and I'm like, oh, this is all becoming really accessible to them, and they're not having to completely find their way out of these countries. It's great to see, but how is it? I know half of what this answer might be, but from a managerial point of view, how's the adaptation period been? Because I know it's probably more challenging, but how's that been?
So overseeing people, managing people, that can be a little harder because we're not in a big studio setting. I think most studios are set up roughly the same way now. The Santa Monica studio where I work now it's a big open seating plan. I can stand up and just see, who's at whose desk, what's going on. You absorb a bunch walking through the studio. You see on this guy's monitor, oh yeah, he's working on that, and then oh whoops, that guy, it's making it red. It's supposed to be green. I can catch that. That kind of just absorption of details and who's working on what, that is really hard now. So what we're asking people to do is just once a week upload some screenshots, do some maybe a video, and then we do lots and lots of Zoom calls, team calls, just for people to demo the work. And it's quite easy to share your screen, honestly, and see what people are making. In some ways, it's actually more effective. So I go to someone's desk and I look over their shoulder and I say, oh, this, that, whatever comment I may have. Now it's like right in my face looking at a screen. You can actually see the art a little closer up than you can when you're standing at someone's desk. So it's a mixed bag. But I think this is definitely now a weapon that we have, like the studios have, to, bring in more talent, international talent. And I would say you mentioned something interesting, how, Russia has great artists in Brazil. It's super interesting how some areas of the world are just busting out talent in certain categories. Like Russia has some of the best hard surface artists you've ever seen. Brazil has some of the best character artists you've ever seen. I don't know why that is, why they kind of dominate certain disciplines. But now we can tap into that. It's going to be good.
You know what? I've never considered. Since you mentioned that, I'm like, yeah, actually, the guys who are powerhouse artists. Yeah, that's pretty accurate. That's quite a weird one. I've never thought of that. I'm going to have to.
Something about your childhood upbringing, you make rad robots or good characters.
Well, actually, speaking of Russia, have you seen, I don't know how active you're on Twitter, but something went round a while ago. Somebody basically went round and photographed lots of Soviet-era bus shelters. All the bus shelters were always based off some sort of abstract art. And, I mean, after this podcast, I'll link it to you, but it's fantastic. I mean, some of the bus shelters are really beautiful. And I'm like, and then it has that, like, Soviet decay to it where it's not been treated for, like, over 50 years.
Yeah, I didn't see the Twitter you're talking about, but it's probably the brutalist architecture style that, was it, I think 20, 30 years ago, there was like dominating the landscape over there.
It's quite a lot of brutalist. It's quite a lot of, like, I don't really know what to call it, like, impressionism, like, it's just very odd. I mean, also, some of it you wouldn't, like the brutalism stuff, you would attach to Russia, but there's some of it which I was like, I'm surprised to see this in Russia. It's very abstract. But I digress. Just you mentioned the word talent, and we got into something yesterday, which was I asked you what you look for in people. So just to summarize, if I am a junior environment artist and you're going to get my CV land on your desk, what kind of thing is there? What little tidbits do you look for in an artist portfolio?
So, I mean, the answer is talent, especially with more junior people. We don't expect you to have 20 pieces. We don't expect you to have shipped games, anything like that. We're just looking for talent. Does it look good? So, I mean, when you art test candidates and stuff, that's really the number one part of the test is, did it come back looking good? Could you put this in your existing video game and would it fit in? Would it hit the quality bar? So mostly, like, it doesn't have to be super polished as long as we can see some raw talent there. That is like the number one thing to get in is, it doesn't matter if you're a master of the software, if you know all the buttons, if you program on the side, whatever. For art, it just has to look good and show us a little bit of, underlying talent, and we'll try to exploit that. We can teach you the tools and teach you some of the more complicated theories and workflows and stuff, but you have to have like a good talent foundation underneath that. That's what we look for mostly with junior to mid-level candidates.
So where does kind of the more techie procedural stuff sit within that? So say, for example, me, substance designer, I spend a lot of time as substance designer. Would you still consider that, because that's a knowledge-based thing, that's as opposed to maybe the traditional means of talent? Do you class that the same boat?
Yeah, I don't think it's any different. You're using a
Mm-hmm.
tool to make something look good. There's a lot of substances that they don't come out great. In fact, I think it's a little harder to make something look good when you do the 100% substance route. So when people can pull that off, that's even more of an indicator of like, ooh, there's some talent here. Because in terms of like, let's say you're going to make a brick wall, ZBrush is going to make you a better brick wall. You can pull out a brush and chip off the edges and have total control. When someone starts approaching that quality level in a procedural program like Designer or even Houdini, that is definitely like an eye opener. Like, wow, okay, that there's something there, because it is quite hard to do.
So actually, we didn't get into this, and I am still on the fence with this. Just speaking to materials as an example, but this applies to wider environment too. If you had a portfolio of just 100% designer stuff, and 100% designer stuff tends to be stuff which in production you never do like that. So, case in point being, like some crazy sci-fi wall. That's never ever going to be. I've done some myself, just as there were like pieces based on Torfric designs. It's like that's never going to see production, never ever ever. But if you saw like a portfolio of just 100% designer stuff where they're flexing their knowledge on designer, I've kind of said in the past, like, I like to see some understanding of how design would be used in production. So generators, I want to see that you can make the paint peel away and decay. I like seeing brick walls where like they look as good as a ZBrush sculpt. Where do you sit on that? Like, do you think the 100% designer or like the sort of the flex pieces which have no business being in, will never make it to a production, you still see value in them?
So yeah, I do, and I actually don't. So I have a few in my ArtStation too, where I turned on displacement, I brought it into Unreal, I turned on ray tracing and made it look. I actually don't think that. I mean, it's flexing now because you can't really pull that off on current gen systems. But in a couple of years, you are going to be turning on tessellation and ray tracing and stuff. So I think that is sort of showing you, when you have the flex material ball, like the sci-fi wall, I think that is going to be the future at some point. Maybe not as elaborate as a sci-fi wall, because we'd probably break that into smaller pieces for draw, call, count, and performance. And there's technical reasons why we wouldn't do it that way. But using displacement and ray tracing and all that stuff, that is going to be commonplace in 5 years. So yeah, I don't see it as a flex piece. I see it as looking to the future. Like, hey, look, this is what the future is going to look like.
Do you think we could potentially go? So I have thought about that, and then I thought maybe we're going to go the other way. Maybe it's going to be, actually, we're going to do way more ZBrush stuff, because we could just we don't need to do the baking and all that sort of stuff. We'll just take that model and put it and use UDIM, some of the stuff we've seen in the UE5 demo. Yeah. Maybe we could go that way. Maybe it's, okay, we're going to use ZBrush more because we can just take their models and dump them in. Like, we can use them. As, maybe that's a bit of a, what's the word, optimistic thinking, but, I've been seeing some of the stuff UE5 are saying, and I'm like, it's not outside the realms of possibility that we go that route.
No, I mean, each generation polygon counts grow. You can add more polygons. Even on the PlayStation 4, we don't really count polygons that often. That's not what slows us down. It's the number of objects, number of materials, material complexity, lighting complexity. It's like polygons are not really that deadly as they used to be. So I think it's going to be a combo. I think you'll see both. I think polygon counts will go up, which is nice. You'll have to rely less on your normal map. That could be a big time saver when your sculpting goes into the game in its original form faster. Big time saving there from retopology and baking and seam, covering up your seams and painter and stuff. But I think the designer thing is just as legitimate going to be the future. Oh, I mean, I think that, not to go too far into the future, and just my opinion on the matter, but I think like even bitmaps and normal maps are a thing of the past. Once a game engine can read, a graph and on the fly create itself, think about it. You get closer to that brick wall and it ups the resolution, dynamically ups the resolution on that node network. You back off and it backs it off. And so we have dynamic resolutions potentially, I think you need a lot more horsepower than maybe even the next gen is going to give us, but I think that's the future. I mean, we've already discussed killing normal maps. I mean, you can get all the information from your height map and convert that. Like, why do you need a normal map?
We've gone this route with shade. When I've been looking at shaders recently in UE4, and I'm hearing some of the stuff that's coming out of UE5, I'm like, is this the route for procedural materials? Like maybe even the stuff we do in designer, mathematical based noises and all create our materials. That's gonna more and more that's being transposed over into the shader, and it's like you said. You know what? I'm not gonna need to make my shader over here in an outsized package, and then all I'm bringing in is textures. It's like no, the whole network is in there. And then I was thinking, oh wow, imagine if you could start hooking into all these generators, cross shader. It's like my mind started getting carried away with me.
I think that is
crazy.
It's going to be really hard to make that happen in like a couple of weeks or a month.
Oh yeah.
But you see the door, like designer really kind of wedged the door open for proceduralism. Houdini's been around for a long time. In fact, 10 years ago, I opened up Houdini, was messing with it to create some destruction, rigid body simulations. But it was too complicated at the time. There was no way to get it to the game engine. And we bought some licenses and never really used them. 6 years later, designer comes along and people jump in and find out, oh, this is not like quite as hard as it looks. And the benefits of node networks and procedural creation all of a sudden dawns on people like, oh, this is totally flexible. That's why this is great. And so now there's a renewed interest in Houdini for that same reason. It's like, okay, now we see sort of the flexibility and the benefits. There's an upfront cost, to create your recipe, to create your network. But once it's done, you have so much flexibility to, hey, you want a new resolution? Fantastic. You want more bricks in the wall? Okay, just go to one node and change your tiling. Not to go too far off on a tangent here, but like one of the problems we face, probably the biggest problem like I've seen in the studios I've worked at is time. Getting stuff done. To hit a high quality bar and time, that's a tricky scenario. But with this procedural stuff, you can see, oh, great, now we can start integrating this time-saving stuff in. And, like you're saying, spend a little bit more time in ZBrush, and that goes directly into the game. And we have to lose all the boring parts we do, like retopologizing and baking and that kind of thing.
I mean, it's kind of weird because I remember when I opened Designer for the first time, and I saw like lots of scary words, and I was like, okay, close that, and I don't touch that again. And I think a lot of people, it's sort of around my age, were seeing people like Rogelio, who we followed for years, for ZBrush materials, and he was starting to dive into designer. And then we see people like Josh Lynch, Daniel Tiger, and Ben Wilson was more to open my eyes to it. It's like, oh, okay, this is pretty sexy art. Like this isn't nerdy numbers and graphs. This is really cool looking art. Okay, I'll try it again.
They brought glamour to tiling materials, which half of all environments, half of them are made of tiling textures, if not more. But now that became like a cool thing to make. And like I said, you can see the future in it. You turn on displacement and it self shadows. It looks beautiful. It's no longer like, oh, I don't want to make the tiling texture. Now it's sort of exciting to make the tiling texture.
I love the fact it's becoming its own art form as well. I think, again, Rogelio did this, and it's probably the best person for it is Chris Hodson. He was making just pieces of art. Like, they're not tileable materials in a sense of, oh, this is designed to be an environment piece, or this is designed for XYZ. It's, oh, this is an aesthetically pleasing image. It just so happens to be made from a procedural tiling material. And I was like, that kind of opened my eyes to it a little bit. I was like, oh, it's becoming its own art form and its own genre, and it's very interesting. I know, like a lot of people who they kind of moan about the ArtStation map balls get lots of likes easily or whatever.
Yeah,
but I'm like, they look cool. Like the map ball, whoever, like, I don't know who was the original person to do this, but whoever decided to, like, okay, we're just gonna, like, the sexy ArtStation image is a ball. That's what we're gonna show you. Whoever, like, started doing that and set that trend, I think probably had a strong-handed designer really blow it up.
Yeah, for sure.
So, this is a pretty broad topic. I've spoken, because it's reminded me we're speaking about materials and design, and then there's Josh Lynch. And when Josh Lynch was last on a podcast, we were speaking about the issues of seniors plateauing. You spend your whole career being an artist, and you reach senior, and it's traditionally now it's like, okay, you have two options. You go principal route where you're like just a high end artist. You're the guy who is the elite, and then you have like lead artists now who becomes more like the managers.
Mm-hmm.
And that's quite a challenge to face because when you spend your whole career, say however long that might be, just being an artist, and it's a very linear path as well. It's like junior, mid, senior. It's like a very straightforward path. You reach this fork in the road where you got to go do something a little bit different. Now you're a principal artist. You had a lot to say about this. Like, can we just talk a little bit about this challenge? Like, it is a challenge. How you found it, how other people have found it, how the industry's tackling it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad it exists because I started my career almost 20 years ago, and for the first 4 years, I was considered a junior mid-level artist. I didn't get to make the cool stuff, but I always wanted to I want to be at senior level and take on more and build more stuff. And then a couple of years later, all of a sudden I was a senior. So it happened so quickly. In the first 6 years of my career, I went from entry level to senior artist. And then after a while, it's like, well, what's the next step? Like you're saying, you become a lead, but maybe not everyone wants to do that. It is kind of a managerial job. You have to look over people and be responsible for a large group. And some people, that's just not their cup of tea. So what do? They just have to stay being a senior artist. So I'm glad the principal thing has popped up because that's like, okay, you can be an artist and we're going to ask even more of you. You're going to work with the tech group and maybe write documentation or test out some tools. I think it's wonderful that you can, instead of spending 8 hours a day just making art, you can spend like 6, and then the other 2 you're doing things to kind of push your studio forward or push workflows forward. I mentioned to you yesterday, we also invented at Santa Monica Studio sort of an in-between category. So it goes junior, mid-level, senior. Then we have a thing called senior staff. And that is like a senior artist that, he just wants to make art, but he's at such a high badass level that, that's like the super senior. Because once you get into principal, and you can go into like art direction, management, there's a bunch of things you can do. The amount of art you're going to make is going to decrease. But I'm happy that it exists. I'm happy the industry has recognized this, and there's like still more goals to shoot for. At the studio I'm at now, I can't speak for a lot of other studios. Mm-hmm. To get that principal role requires a lot of proving yourself, multiple shipped games. So it is nice, and people do get paid more and stuff to do that. So contrast that to someone who's like, I think you're saying like a lawyer, or a teacher. They have a 30-year career to get to senior, but in the video game industry, you get senior in the first couple of years, and then you're like, what now? I'm glad we're trying to address that.
It's not an easy thing to address. Because you imagine, like, say for example, the whole industry agrees, like, just tomorrow, okay, we're going to extend the sort of norm for a junior artist by 2 years, and then the same for a mid, and then the same for a senior. All them people who are at them roles at the moment will be like, well, what the hell? You just screwed me over. Like, it's such a difficult problem to solve. Yeah. And you guys are doing a good job with the senior staff, and I know like Ubisoft at the moment have the advanced artist, but part of me is kind of like, does this need addressing? Do we need to let's correct what these measurements are? Because like we said, I could be a senior. Well, I am a senior. I'm 26 and I'm a senior, but that's quite normal for most people in their, if they start their career, say straight out university, so 19, 20, if they're like diligent, it's not uncommon to get to senior in your 20s, and it's like, yeah, that's not normal. There's not another industry out there where that happens. It's really odd. You mentioned teachers and lawyers.
Not in banking, not in real estate. I mean, you name it. But here's what is different is this is like a talent-based industry. So there's not countless numbers of people who, can or want to or have the ability to do this job. I mean, there's a limited number of schools for one. You have to have an art background. You also have to be technical. You also have to be fairly good with people. You got to know video games. You got to play games. I mean, the checklist to get into game development is pretty long. And so when people hit that checklist, they're pretty talented people. And when a talented person wants to move up fast, and you go, no, we're going to keep you down lower because that shouldn't take. So you shouldn't be able to rise up so fast. Then what happens is people will just quit. They'll go find a job. In fact, that is what I did at my first job for 4 years. After 4 years, they still viewed me as like the new guy, the junior guy. I went to a new company and they're like, oh, you're the guy that shipped that one game. Great. And so I got a huge jump by leaving. And that's a bad thing for our business when your best option to make more money is to quit your job and go to a new company. But that's what happens. And that's how people end up getting that, junior to mid-level to senior quickly is they just jump a few jobs and it happens for them.
That is definitely the quicker way of doing it. I mean, I'm the same. That's what I ended up doing. I mean, to be fair, my first year was a case of I was that junior who joined, and like, when I was younger, I was like a very bullish person. I was like, okay, I'm going to get better. I'm going to get better. How do I get? And like, my lead was to hate me for the first couple of years because I was always hounding, hey, what can I do better? What can I do better? And I progressed. And it's funny, you say it's a talent-based industry. It's very odd because it's like, okay, you need to be artistically minded. Great. We mentioned yesterday, you have to basically be an engineer, and you have to have a mind that can think about problem solving in an engineering way, because we're using tools, hardware, and software where they are technical. Like, you open a Blender or Max or Maya, whatever modeling package, that thing is scary. There is a lot of buttons and there's a lot of technical parameters. So add on to that, and to me, by the way, it's like, once you're a junior, you mentioned yourself, you hire talent, you hire artistic talent. The one you can't hire, or you can't, it's harder to dial in, is the personal skills. That's the thing which I've seen block people the most. I've worked with some very talented artists, but they don't play as nice with either boys and girls, so they're not able to express themselves as well. And that's been a big blocker for them. Like, trying to get all of these things together, and you mentioned principal art, like, you're an artist, but the managerial skills, like, that's why it's such a hard job, because we need to find an artist who's the best of the best, who is also a really good people person, who is also really good at managing, and has his engineering
fairly technical mindset as well.
Yeah, it's like, suddenly the pickings get pretty slim with the amount of people that exist who are able to do all these things.
Yes. And also, you need to, your guy will have a lot of influence in whatever studio he's at. And you need to understand the game's business. Like, so if, your creative director's like, we're going to make a skateboarding game, it's like a senior person might be reading the tea leaves of the industry and what games are coming out and being like, no, we should not do that. So there's going to be some business things you have to be aware of so that you don't make a bad decision, because games take a long time to make. When you start a game, it's coming out in 3 years, maybe 5. So you have to be wise about what you choose to do. If every studio is like, we're going to make a Call of Duty killer, no, you're not.
Yeah.
Like the brand recognition and all that stuff.
Just no, you're not. That's it. No.
Also understands a smart strategy for the studio. Anyways, you were talking about like the soft skills.
No, I'm just imagining that conversation. Like you're in a room with all the seniors, and the exec comes in and goes, "Okay, guys, I've got an idea. We're gonna make Fortnite again, but we're gonna do it better." And everyone just goes, "No, I'm not doing that." the executives there like, well, I'm stumped then. But it's actually, you're right though, because there has to be a slight, and I want to say business, but that kind of being able to think into the future. Like when you're establishing pipelines, they're there for quite a few years.
Yeah.
And if you have not got forward-thinking people, your pipeline, once this game ships, it's like, oh, this isn't as good as it could be. There's all these other games doing better things than us. You have to almost be thinking 10 steps ahead of the competition, because when this game comes out in the long haul, it has to stand the test of time. And again, these are really rare people who can do this.
It is amazing that video games even get made at all. Like, when I think back to the different games I've shipped, the amount of missiles we've dodged and luck that has happened, it's amazing that they come out. And honestly, is because so many things can go wrong. Like I say, not one bad pipeline in one department is enough to tank an entire project. So, yeah, you have to have people that are forward-thinking, can also look back and be like, okay, here's what didn't work last time. It's complicated, yeah.
And then this is where I feel bad for the guys who have to hire, because you say one bad pipeline could tank a production. One bad person can completely cripple a team. I've been in teams like that where there's just one, and it's like, I don't think they're, and also, these people who we deem as like negative, I don't think they're inherently bad people. I just think they have negative mindsets. Like, it's the small things, coming in every morning and, being down on the team. Oh God, I gotta do this. I've got this thing, and moaning or complaining. It's like, that stuff grates teams down. And over the course of production, I've seen this really hurt teams. But how do we help? Like, this is I don't actually know the answer to this, and I'm trying. This is a bit kind of my skills. I'm trying to work out how do you help these people? These inherently, I don't want to say toxic. Toxic is not a fair word to describe them, but soft skills which are missing. Not necessarily management skills, not their art skills. Because when you're saying, hey, you're not great to work with, it's a very personal thing. It's not like your skills aren't good enough. It's like you as a person are not working with different people. We need to correct this. Like, can you correct it? Or is it like, oh, maybe this person can't be with his team anymore? How do we tackle that?
I mean, I would venture to guess that the majority of game developers are introverted type people that just fits. A while ago in our studio, we actually did a personality test. It was really interesting. People were like, I don't want to do this. They're trying to find out who I am. And, there's all kinds of conspiracy theories going around, but we're just trying to learn about the personalities in our studio. It's a thing called Myers-Briggs. You can take it online and it says, oh, you're Darth Vader or you're Skywalker. And, it kind of tells you what your personality is. And what we learned was, at least in the art departments, at the time, 20 people took the test and 17 were introverted, which is not good or bad. It's just that's what they are. 3 people were extroverted, myself being one of them, and one of the other leads at the time. So it's like, oh, that kind of makes sense where people slot in. So anyway, my point is people being introverted, a lot of times the soft skills is just not a part of their personality naturally. Mm. But we all sit together and we have to work together and talk a lot. And so there is a high level of communication we have to do with a lot of people that maybe they don't want to have to communicate. They'd rather sit down, put on headphones, and make art. And I'm not picking on that. That's kind of how the talent cookie crumbles, I guess. But we try when we're hiring people. In fact, so I teach the Environment for Games class at the Noman School of Visual Effects, and I dedicate a whole lecture just to this topic of personality, bedside manner, how to receive criticism, how to give critiques, realizing that your work actually belongs to the company you work for and it's not yours. And just being easygoing, because like you said, you don't want to use the word toxic, but it can have that kind of toxic effect. One very negative person or one unhappy person, he will talk about the bad things at lunchtime. He will complain to the managers, and it can spiral downward where people start thinking a great scenario is all of a sudden a bad one, because that's like human nature. So here's a little interesting tidbit. When we hire people, we look at people's portfolios. I look at portfolios every day. It takes me about a minute to figure out what software they use, how they made it. That is very easy. If not seconds, to look and be like, yes, no, whatever. By the time people start going to like phone screens with us and we fly them into the studio, sit down, we're mostly just checking the personality and how they will be to work with, whether they'll be friendly with everybody. Because like I said, we can tell you're not going to answer some question that we're like, oh, that's it. You answer the question, we're going to hire you. No, we're checking you for team fit, for personality fit, because we don't want to hire anybody that's, difficult to be around. We all want to be friendly and get along and kind of like what you're saying.
Yeah, there's only one problem with that though, I guess, is stress. Like, that's where I think the worst side of everyone comes out. That's when a lot of the conflict happens, because stress normally occurs over difficult decisions, and to solve things in a short term requires conflict. There is, I don't think there is. I mean, I've been through my fair share of interviews. Is there no real way to test somebody's kind of stress tolerance, is there? Because that's, for me, I think that's the biggest moment of the tell for what kind of person someone really is. Backs against the wall, we need to rely on each other now, but there's no way to get knowing that, apart from reputation. But that's a whole different kind of fish.
Yeah.
I mean, should we care about that? Okay, this is probably a better way to phrase this. Should we care about someone's stress tolerance? Although, this is me being utopianistic, but we want to avoid stress. Obviously, we don't want stress in the workplace. I think it's going to be impossible. You can't help but avoid stress. But is there any way to gauge these things? Apart from, I think personality tests can do it to a certain degree. Is there any way to gauge it?
I'm not advocating the personality test thing. It was sort of a fun activity studio, and at the end of it, people got a lot out of it. They're like, oh, I tend to be this personality. People learned a lot about themselves, which was kind of cool. Myself included. I was like, oh yeah, I do have tendencies. And now this paper has confirmed it. Going back to like when we're interviewing people, it is pretty stressful. If you're a candidate being interviewed at a studio, you have 5 or 6 of your peers, probably like a higher ranking than you, sitting there asking you questions. It is stressful, and it is a good gauge to see like, okay, how are they dealing? Because we've seen people like just sort of melt down and panic in interviews because we're being intimidating, even though it's not meant to be that way. But it's just you're being ganged up on. It's 5 to 1, 4 to 1 odds, and people are picking at you and being like, why did you do this? How do you do this? What would you do in this situation? So we actually get a pretty good read of people's stress. And sometimes we will actually bad cop a little bit. If someone's in there, we'll kind of push a little bit just to see where their point is. Because we've actually had some candidates totally fly off the handle in interviews with, quite reasonable questions. We're like, okay, if you flew off the handle in the interview, what's going to happen during crunch time, or what's going to happen when, oh crap, the deadline changed? Because that happens. Making games, for whatever reason, is super stressful. It shouldn't be, right? We're making video games like a dream job. This is hands down the most stressful job I've ever had. And as I kind of went up the ranks, it keeps getting more and more stressful. The budgets are hundreds of millions of dollars now. You don't get a game done in 2 years, rarely anymore. It takes 3 to 5. So, I mean, it's high stress, and that's it. You're asking a great question. If people are going to watch this and wonder about, what we're really trying to get at when we're interviewing people, this is part of it. What's your personality? How good are you going to be to work with? Are you going to be, be able to be friends with people? Because if you're friends with people, you'll get a much better result working together.
Yeah, we spoke about it a little bit yesterday. Yeah, because that's how I have to treat my colleagues, my friends. Like, for example, I'm dragging them into Discord and just spending our spare time with each other. Because, from my rugby days, it's like when I was with teams where we barely knew each other, we didn't win a lot of games. But when we had a couple of seasons where we all spent time with each other, in each other's back pockets, going out together, getting lunch, hanging out, and you work a little bit, like you go the extra 2% for your friends. And this is probably just a mental trick for me, just to help me in my workplace, but I apply the exact same thing to my workplace. Everyone's my friend, and I know I have had experiences where people are like, they're just not, they don't want that, they don't want a chummy person. Then I'm like, fair enough, I'll back off. Actually, this is a personal question for you. I'm also very extroverted, as you can tell. I like to talk for a living. I enjoy interviews. I've done a lot of them. I find them very fun. It's just me getting to talk to a bunch of artists. Do you have the same thing? I don't know if this is an extrovert thing, but like, I love interviews. I find them so fun. If I can get to them stages, I'm like, yes, I get to talk to somebody for a couple of hours about games and my art. It's like, this is great. I mean, is that the same for you?
Yeah, I mean, I like it. I generally like just talking to people and hanging out. But, I tested as I'm extroverted, so I'm supposed to be like that. Sometimes some of the more introverted artists, we have to like drag them to the interviews. Come on, go there and ask some questions and stuff. But, it gets done. The friend thing you were mentioning, I actually have kind of a strong opinion of this, because I don't view like a career really as belonging to a certain studio or a style or a game. I've happened to work on the same franchise for a while now, but I view like sort of, in our area, the Southern California scene, I view that as my job, not like the studio. And I guess what I'm getting at is, if I'm reviewing someone's work, right, and I look at it and go, almost everything I look at in my mind, I'm like, I would do that differently. And I suppose I could say, I could make them change it. Mm-hmm. But I will always err on the side of, if they're hitting quality, if someone's not hitting quality, that's a different issue. But if people are hitting quality, it just looks different than maybe it's in my imagination or in the art director or game director's imagination, we'll leave it so that person is happy. So that person has ownership. And so that person will want to work with me again someday, and I will want to work with them again someday. Because studios collapse all the time. You don't want to be the guy that was like the jerk lead or the bully or tried to exert too much power over people. I would much rather always be friends, even if it doesn't quite look as good as it could, I will choose the option that like is more agreeable, so that we can all like coexist together longer, right?
Actually, we didn't get into this yesterday, but I have got one question, which has come up, and I've spoken to people about, and I have quite a harsh opinion on this matter. The you know when you hear the phrase "I want to feel valued," which is such a vague thing. You're like, what does that mean? Like, explain to me what that means. And I don't know whether it's just because the studios I've been at have always been very good studios, but it's always been to me, people, when you feel valued, it's because you're doing good work. And people appreciate good work. When you do good work, or you come up with clever solutions, or you're supportive, or you're a nice guy, you are valued. I've always felt like that. I've always seen my peers, feeling valued for doing good work. When I speak, I do a lot of mentorships, and it's like, I don't feel valued where I am, and I'm like, you have to explain what that means, because that is kind of a cliche at this point. Like, what did you want? If you don't feel valued now, what did you want? I mean, you run teams, and Sony Santa Monica is renowned for having strong teams and strong culture. If you heard this term, when people say, "I want to feel valued," and what can you speak to what you think it means a little bit?
I mean, a part of it is just being talked to nicely and treated with respect.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that should be as a given. And I know I've had bad leads, bad bosses, bad art directors, but it's like we've all had that in whatever job that can happen. So, the attitude sort of flows down from the top. Whether it's a friendly atmosphere, an adversarial atmosphere, if there's conflict. So that is something that can be controlled by the senior guys in the studio, like what the feeling is like. But I think a bigger part to that, besides everyone just being polite and decent to each other, is the ownership thing.
Mm-hmm.
Artists really want to own what they're making. I mean, you're sitting there looking at it for 8 hours a day. You're sculpting it. You're in there organizing nodes and stuff. That has to be respected. And what I mean by that is we want to give people like ownership of what they're making, and we want them to feel empowered that if they make something, and maybe it's a little bit off the art direction, maybe it's a little bit off, like I'm saying, what I would have, if they've read my mind, what I would have had them do, it's still gonna be good, barring they hit quality and the basics of that. And so like once you present a situation for people like that, where they can make art and they go, my idea is gonna make it through, or the way I'm gonna interpret this piece of concept art for my level, that's gonna be supported. All of a sudden you have artists that I think they feel valued. And that's what we pay people for. We hire artists to make good art. We don't hire them to all of a sudden come and mind read someone else or be micromanaged. Things just go downhill. So as soon as you give ownership to the artist and let them, within reason, call the shots on stuff, all of a sudden you have someone who's very invested in what he's working on, cares a lot about it, and knows he's being supported by his leads, directors, managers, whatever.
Actually, you said something yesterday which surprised me. You guys you look for generalists, like strictly speaking. You want people who can do lots of things, and that was shocking to me. So just explain that bit again, because that was a bit which I went through the whole of yesterday. That was probably the thing that really took me off guard. I was like, oh shit, I didn't expect you to say that.
Yeah, and it's part of that same ownership thing. We want to be able to hire people, and this is mostly the senior level people. But even mids and juniors, if they have ability and desire to do it, we want to give people a chunk of the game and be like, this is yours.
Mm-hmm.
Go away for 2 years and make this portion of the game. Obviously, we check in weekly, stuff like that. But, their task is going to be the same task for a few years, and they're going to own it. And that means they own it from working with the design group at the beginning to maybe working with the concept guys to develop the vision, to doing grayscale blockouts, all the assets, all the tiling materials, even the final assembly. We don't hand that off. So a senior environment artist does from A to almost Z at our studio. They take it from the beginning to the end. And that solves a lot of problems. One, they're totally invested and they own something in a way that most companies, I don't think, do anymore, really.
Mm-hmm.
It enables us to actually have a smaller team, because instead of having to have 20 material guys, 2 hard surface guys, we just have generalists, and we can literally assign anybody to anything.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's harder to find people that, can or want to do that. But I think our art team is roughly half the size of Naughty Dog's art team. And they do a split thing where they have material artists and artists. And I mean, you cannot talk bad about how good their games look. They currently have the best looking game ever made, like on the shelves, in my opinion. But the more you compartmentalize, I think the more bodies you have to have. The more generalized you are, the more strike team you are. Like Navy SEALs, and anyone can kind of go take on anything. That has been our mentality. That's how our studio has been run for the last 20 years, and it's worked out well for us. It's not perfect. Nothing's perfect, but good advice to anyone trying to break in or move up: become a generalist. Learn about lots of different things. You'll be more valuable. When we look for an environment artist, it's I also can do my own lighting. It's fantastic. That's just another weapon that we have.
I think the reason they call me off guard is because for the longest time there has been an element of frustration when this is why I'm glad to speak to also people from different gaming communities, like the US gaming scene versus the EU gaming scene. I mean, it's still different, and I'm glad I speak to different people, because for the longest time I've been frustrated by recruiters in the games industry. They want they ask students coming out of university to showcase so many different skill sets, and yet they'll get into the industry and it's you're only making materials, or you're only making props, or you're only level art. And then I was why do recruiters look for this? Why are we not just looking for these specialized people? They speak to you and you're oh no, we want generalists. This is that's a big check in the box for us. I'm oh, okay, well there's a new perspective I wasn't considering. And to be fair, isn't it? I would have said it's not easier to find. Sorry, not easier. That's the wrong word. But generalists in terms of juniors, aren't they a little bit more common? Because as a junior, you haven't really I mean, this is just from my experience. As a junior, you try your hand at everything, and you're still you're kind of like that raw clay, and you haven't narrowed yourself down into something. Is that
and usually they come out of school where at school they've had to take a character art class and an environment class and a props class and a tech art class, and so they do come out kind of generalists. And I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with having specialized people. Like Josh Lynch worked at our studio for a while. He was great for bringing in, helping us integrate substance into our pipeline and all that stuff. But we're just limited by desks is one of the things one of the problems we have. And so it's okay, it's if one person, one desk that can do 10 things, it's to 10 people and 10 desks that can do one thing. We'll try to find the first one.
Just on this, just going back to what we were talking about at the beginning, do you think that would change now with this whole remote working thing, or do you think you guys would stick to your guns? Just I'm thinking, you're right, desk space and just the amount of bodies you need to find. It's suddenly the whole world is your shop window, rather than this tiny little window here. Do you think that could potentially open it up, or do you think no? This is just our culture, it's the way we do stuff.
No, I think you're right. I think that that can instead of wasting valuable desk space in expensive Los Angeles, for an artist, we would hire a material guy that's in some other part of the world. Yeah, that does make that easier. That's it's not just desk space that's the equation. It's more of the ability to strike team stuff. A new level just got designed. It's bigger than we thought it was. Okay, let's rearrange our chess pieces, and knowing that each chess piece is an absolute murderer of an artist, we just have flexibility to you go tackle that, you go. Once it's all compartmentalized, okay, now we have to do that in a giant pod. Okay, we need a new texture guy, and we need a new hard surface guy, and a new prop guy. But we may lose this battle in 10 years because game studios have been compartmentalizing it. Sense why? Because it's hard to be a master of everything.
Well, after speaking yesterday, I think there is a strong case to be made for what we spoke about, which was consistency. I guess if you have one person on an area, it's actually, you know what? Talk about the point you made to me yesterday about why consistency is so important, because, again, it's something probably not spoken about enough. Everyone wants to talk about the sexy new materials. Houdini has this crazy pipeline. Everyone's focused on his hard skills. Yeah. But this knowledge-based thing of consistency, is not spoken about enough.
And so some games look better than others, right? Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's very hard to put your finger on why one game looks better than another game. You can see the art dump in. It's all the assets grabbed. Why did that game as a whole not look as good as some other games? And the secret is like techniques that promote consistency. So, we talked about like texel density. We have very strict texel density rules to keep things consistent. We're very careful about how we use photogrammetry, because photogrammetry will break consistency in a second because it's so eerily, realistic compared to like the hyperreal sculpt that someone made. So a lot of our workflows and our tools are based around consistency. In fact, we, all of our artists, they follow the same general workflow, which is a high poly to low poly workflow. We don't do a lot of, I'm going to take this photo and then grab a normal off the photo and bash it that way. If we want something made, we make it. So if you see a leaf in our game, that was sculpted in ZBrush. If you see a brick, it was sculpted in ZBrush. Everything goes from high to low. That promotes consistency. The texel density thing is super important for us. We never want to have a mismatch of resolutions, because you never see that in real life. It's like you never see like a blurry laptop on top of a sharp looking table. Yeah. But video games chronically do that all the time. And I think what people don't realize is that they do recognize that subliminally, like subconsciously, that they're in a simulation. It's an immersion breaker totally when resolutions. So keeping the resolution the same, that helps. If it's all blurry, good. If it's all sharp, good. If something's sharp, something's blurry, your brain goes, that's not real, whether or not you realize it or not. So consistency is the thing that makes stuff really look good. And it's sort of the hardest one to pin down too. Like, why do some games look better than others?
Yeah, and I guess it comes back to as well is that the majority of the people, what's the word, absorbing the art are not artists. The gamers, the game developers make up 0.01% of the community. And it's that subconscious thing of like when you look at a piece of art and you go, does it look right? I don't know. It's a subconscious thing. They're not probably putting too much attention to it, but like, just something's not right. And like, there's easier things you can look at, like composition, lighting, values not reading right. But this, like the consistency thing, you're right. It's really hard to nail down if you're not going to eye train for it. Does that apply? Do you apply this? Do you think about this in portfolios as well? Do you open a portfolio piece, say for example an environment, look at it and go, oh, that's not consistent texel density, like you can see it there. And is that a marker in your mind? Is it a red flag, or is it something you're like, I can train that out?
Yeah, so if it was like mid-level junior student coming out of school, that's the thing that's going to scream to me right away is like either texel density being broken or polygon density being inconsistent. I mean, any kind of inconsistency, lighting inconsistency, what's shadowing, what's not. That would scream out to me, but we give it a pass for sure. If someone's showing good talent, good raw talent for the sculpting and the material work, by all means, that's not going to ding you too badly. So we can teach you that. Like, we can teach you those theories. And they're weird to people. And the fact that we never scale an object, people will be like, wait, what? Yeah, we never scale an object. If you do that, you have a blurry resolution. You never scale UVs randomly. You don't say, I have extra space, scale this up. You never do that. The UVs have to be the size they are to have correct texel density. Now, if someone is senior and has shipped 5 games and they're not showing that, that can be a little bit of a question mark. But again, we tried to be friendly. Like, I tried to be very understanding scenarios. Maybe they had an art director that didn't care. Maybe they were great. The consistency. You never know, and not every studio cares. Like, if someone's working on a game at Riot Games and their portfolio is not quite hitting our quality level, that's understandable. They were at Riot Games. Mm-hmm. But this is why art tests exist. In the art test, we give instructions like, okay, here are the check boxes we want you guys to hit. Hit them.
Hit them. Yeah, is that what you said in the email? So here's your art test. You have this much time. Here's the markers you need to keep an eye on. Make sure you do it.
We spell it out pretty clear. Like, and we have a very fun art test. We sort of limit it getting online.
Yeah, no.
Naughty Dog has an art test that you can track down all over the place. People have seen it a bunch. It's the floating mountain with the big tree and
with no deadline.
Everyone's seen that. But ours, we try to. If someone does put it online, we tell them to take it off because we don't want people to be influenced by it. But ours is supposed to be very fun. It's not supposed to take a ton of time. Mm-hmm. But it's really going to put you to the test whether you can break down a scene into modules, whether you can decide what's going to be a hero asset versus a modular piece versus a tiling texture. It really will expose where an artist is at. What's your ZBrush skills like? What's your painter skills like? But honestly, most people don't pass the test because they don't read the instructions.
Oh, of course they do. Well, just on this whole topic, where do you sit on trim sheets then? Because trim sheets is, I guess, chronic for you will use it. You kind of break texel density a lot because you stretch UVs to fit the scenario. You scale things up and objects. Like, is it something that for your studios, like, mindset of texel density is king, it is paramount, it is the number one goal? Is that why you guys maybe go for the one-to-ones of, okay, the leaf, this was a sculpted leaf. The brick wall there, that was a brick wall designed to be that size and sculpted to that size.
Right.
Does that mean there's not much room for trim sheets in workflows, or like if they're out, they're used very sparingly?
No, we use trim sheets all the time as well. That's a nice technique, mostly for architecture. It's like, if you imagine the Roman Colosseum, all of those vertical, horizontal trims, we'll make those out of trim sheets. But they tile, they're like 2, 4, 8 meters wide. They snap to the grid. But they receive the same ZBrush treatment as anything else does. We'll take it into ZBrush and give just as much love to that. So yeah, we use trim sheets and all kinds of modular. I mean, memory is still, we don't have more memory than anyone else does. So we have to use a lot of the same tricks.
So you will make, though, you won't have like, okay, here is our what's an example? Here's our concrete trim sheet, and it's like, here's your trim sheet, and it's like a bunch of strips. I'm guessing then in that case you'll have trim sheets designed for scale. So okay, here's our 8x8 trim sheet, here's our 2x2 trim sheet, here's our 1x1, and you'll design them in such a way where this trim should not be used on a gigantic brick wall over there. Yeah. It's designed for the one which is run by the player. Okay, that's fair. That makes sense. Is it? Maybe it's different for the US, but these skills are not spoken about much at all. Like, a lot of the focus is on all the sexy stuff. Hey, let's make some cool shaders, really great props of AK textures and marmoset renders. These technical skills, they're not spoken about much, but is it necessarily even a thing to worry about? Like, is it okay just to know what texel density is? Because, like you said, you'll teach it. Like, it's not spoken about much, but I don't even know if that's an issue or not.
I mean, I wish these things were spoken about more, because I play a lot of games that are just like, guys, seriously, just change your mentality a little bit and you'll get a better result. And some games are, they're in rush timelines, so people do, less than ideal things like scale stuff up, down, break texel density. I'm surprised that the stuff isn't more widely known. All the people I know that work at like the studios, definitely they follow these rules. And like I said, I teach a class at Nome, and I go big time, like how to break down an environment. Because an environment is pretty much made of 3 different categories. It's either a tiling texture, which those have now become a lot more fun, like saying to make. Modular assets, so like your trim sheet, your tiling blocks, like anything, a rock set that you mash together. That's all your modular parts. And then we have our straight up hero assets, like statues and the the fountains and the beautiful stuff that they're just like a character. They fit on a 0 to 1 texture page, and we spare no expense on them.
I guess it's one of the things where it's kind of like, people know, it's like you don't know unless you're in. Is the issue, I think. Like you said, I think every single studio is aware of texel density in there. Most of them are upholding it, but until you're in the studio, it's not really brought to the forefront. Like, there's plenty of people pre-industry I speak to, and their attention's in different places, and that's why I focus quite heavily on. I like seeing portfolios and environments and assets where it's in an engine. You're showing me you know how to implement it. It's the same with materials. Like, I love seeing portfolio materials. I love the big, sexy map balls, which are never going to be, in production, but they look great. But I also appreciate someone who can make a coherent set of materials that will blend really nicely together and work in a scene really, really well. them sort of skills, I just think I think it's just not sexy. They're not something you're gonna put on our station and be like, hey, here's this really simple scene that has perfect texel density. It's gonna get, it doesn't get clicks, unfortunately.
And that's the difference between a junior mid-level artist or like a, they can probably, like, if you look at, an asset that a junior made and a senior made, a lot of times the assets are the same. The senior, is at a higher ranking and earns his money because planning it on a much larger scale. He knows pitfalls to avoid. He'll plan around things like texel density, making the scene modular. Frame rate's a big one. Like when we're building an environment, from day one, we're thinking, okay, how is this going to run? Objects are being what potential worst case scenario for, poly counts, material counts, frame rate. You have to take that into account right at the beginning. If not, you're dead. You'll shoot yourself in the foot. And the junior person just hasn't gone through that or doesn't know that yet, So left to their own devices, they'll make something that looks good, but it's not going to run. It's not going to fit on disk. It's going to have memory problems, CPU problems, GPU problems, you name it. The senior guy knows how to build from day one to avoid all those pitfalls because he fell in them when he was a junior artist. That is the big difference. And we have some very talented junior artists, some freakishly talented junior artists right now. They're like, okay, my work looks just as good as the senior guys. Can I be a senior artist? And it's like, not yet. And the reason is that guy knows how to ship games, and he's a better game developer. Art-wise, yes. You're matching the quality. That's what we expect. But he knows how to plan 2 years down the road what his life is going to be like. He knows how to plan for the combat that's going to happen, for the cinematic that's going to happen. That's the difference is, and that's what we look for in like a senior artist is, how good of a game developer are you? Do you know enough about how games are made? When you're making an environment, not the design and the puzzle and the combat and the lighting and overseeing putting the whole thing together. If you don't understand all the, it's gonna explode.
Yeah, and I think that's like the biggest message I think is that's been popping up recently is being a good game dev, not just a good artist, because they are very different things. And I think all the stuff we've spoken about over the course of this podcast, and I'm so glad, by the way, that you came back on to do this, because stuff like soft skills, like understanding workflows, like not being toxic, understanding pipelines, texture density, all these sorts of things we've been speaking about make you a good game developer. Your artist we haven't really touched on the artist elements that much. We've been talking about being a good game dev. And we're going to assume if you're a junior, we already know you're a good artist. You wouldn't be in a job if you weren't a good artist. But becoming a good game dev is all the stuff we've spoken about over the course of this hour. And like I said, this is why I appreciate it so much you come back on, because I think this is going to help a lot of people. I think a lot of people probably need to hear some of this stuff to help us get a perspective right. Because that's what a lot of it is. It's just frame of mind, a perspective on what are you doing to, help you progress, right?
Yeah, I mean, think about it. And you can't rush learning to be a good game developer. That comes from shipping games, which, it used to be a 1 year ordeal, then became a 2 year ordeal, and now we're talking 3 to 5 for games. I think that thing you were bringing up at the beginning, like people shoot up to senior too fast, that might take care of itself in the way that you can only ship so many games so fast these days. In a 10-year career, you may ship one game. You may ship 2 games. And that stuff you cannot teach in school. You just have to go through it. Like, how am I going to work through crunch time? How am I going to work through the stress? Like you're bringing up stress. Making art is like, I don't know. It's really 25% of it. The other 25% is your ability to get along with others and remember, the family and the team. And then, 50% is game development. And I'm speaking mostly for environment art. I think the character art guys, they stay mostly true sculptors and stuff. But, if you want to be a level designer or environment art, half of it is not even art. It's other things.
Engineering and management. Right, Nate, I mean, dude, I've took enough of your time. I've took 2 of your lunch breaks. I'm so sorry. But I am so glad. No, that's good to know then. Dude, I know I've said this a couple of times, but I really do appreciate this because you know what? The second time round was even more fun than the first time, so I'm happy. But everyone
Cool.
listening, please, especially with this one, please, like, follow, share, subscribe, because there's so much good information in here, and the more people that get to hear it, the more people that get helped, and the more people that can hopefully make it into the industry. But Nate, we wrap it up. Dude, thank you so much, and I'll catch everyone next week.
Yeah, thank you.